really hard to imagine someone better than Roger McNamee to come really cap out this day. And as you know, it won't be just capping it out here at the talk, but also come back a little bit later and you'll get to hear his band play upstairs, Moon Alice. And well, you know, there's tons I could say about Roger. You know, not 82 grad.
Hopefully you won't.
Yeah. We'll keep it short. I gotta say a few things though, right? You know, 82, went off to T. Rowe Price. Very quickly was running their science fund there. Did some venture stuff at T. Rowe, which was kind of new at the time. Electronic Arts, Sybase. Sybase, incidentally, the SAP CEO is going to be here later this month. They bought Sybase recently. But way back, Roger was funding those guys. Went on and founded Integral Partners. And from there to Silver Lake. And each one of these things creating innovation. You know, when you look at Silver Lake really proved that the whole leverage buyout model would work in tech with, you know, spectacular successes with Seagate, and then you know, on to Elevation, and we're all kind of sitting on the edge of our seats. Roger, you know, watching you guys this sprint, just amazing with Yelp, and then the Facebook IPO on the horizon, just the amazing success here. But you know, that's not what I love most about Roger. I got to tell you what I love most about Roger, and that is that Roger thinks differently. He thinks differently, not just about business, but about music, about life, in so many different ways, and you'll see some of that tonight. You get a love for music way back as a Tuck student, and unlike a lot of students, didn't give that up. You know, worked hard and played hard and kept playing hard the whole way through, and that's different. That's different, and you'll see that this evening. But I've got to tell you, you know, the hour I spend with Roger every year out on Sand Hill Road is the most valuable hour I spend in a year, no doubt, absolutely. And a lot of it's because of really one thing. You know, flatly said, Roger sees things in technology that no one else sees, no one. And so it gives me a lot of pleasure to welcome you, Roger.
Well, I think
as you can see, I blush easily. I guess I should start with a disclaimer. Past results are not necessarily indicative of future performance. The presentation I'm about to give is, hey, Pete, come on in and grab a seat, man. There's a few down here in front. This is my bandmate, Pete Sears, and he was like standing outside, and I don't think that's right, so come on in, Pete. Somebody give Pete a seat, okay? Anyway, as Eric said, I'm Roger McNamee, and I've been investing in technology since I left Tuck in 1982. And one of the things you learn very quickly in the investment business is the importance of good timing and the importance of dumb luck. And I've had a disproportionate amount of each. And when you have a lot of good timing and good luck, it gives you the opportunity to use a longer time horizon than other people. And one of the really interesting things about the investment business is that all asset classes today operate with a time horizon below 3 years, including venture capital. And as a consequence, the markets for investing in technology, but more importantly for building technology companies, have a complete absence of competition once your time horizon gets out past 3 years. And what's really interesting is that when you're talking about building companies, 3 years is a blink of an eye. And when you talk about investment results, it's a blink of an eye. And so the notion that the whole world has, for what reason I can't explain, abandoned the field creates an opportunity for all of us. Now, that's not always true. There are parts of the tech cycle where there's really nothing new worth doing. And we've been in one of those modes for a few years. I believe we are at an inflection point that I think will drive the entire career for many of you. It will certainly finish everything in my career and go well beyond. I think this is one of the most important moments in the history of the technology industry. And what I'm about to show you is version 8.1, which is the 53rd or 54th iteration of a slide deck that I have been open sourcing for the last 16 months. What happened was I went to visit my former partner, John Doerr at Kleiner Perkins, and I showed him the first version of this thing, which basically suggested we were at this really big inflection point and that we needed to behave differently. And it was figuring out one new piece of technology, HTML5, which we'll talk about in a moment. And John looked at me and said, look, Roger, I've read the HTML5 spec. It's just software. It's just another programming language. And he said, you know, you may be right, but it doesn't matter. It's going to take too long. I was crushed. This had happened to me before, though, so I was prepared. And so I said, you know, before I abandon this, I'm going to go out and try it. I'm going to try it two ways. First, I'm going to try it by showing this to other people and improving it, finding out what's wrong, and systematically taking these hypotheses and moving them towards theory. In addition, I'm going to use the band as a platform to actually do HTML5 applications and see if I can't innovate profoundly in the way that entertainment is delivered. And here we are 16 months later, and we've had a riot. It's been a blast. I've shown this deck to senior executives at every major technology company in Silicon Valley, every major publisher in the United States, with only a few exceptions, and lots and lots of really smart, really good people, all of whom have shredded it. Okay? That is my invitation to you today. I would like your negative feedback. I really want to know what you disagree with. I'm happy if you agree with things, that's fine. I'm happy to change your worldview. But I really want to know where you disagree, okay? Because this is a work in progress. This is only version 8.1. So, 10 hypotheses for technology investing. The first 4 are not about the future. They're actually about the present. And I have a very different view of the present than anyone I know in Silicon Valley. Fundamentally, our industry, and I talk about Silicon Valley here, is making the same mistake the railroads made in the 50s. Does Tuck still teach the railroad marketing strategy course? Okay, so the railroad industry in the 50s, the United States government first built an interstate highway system. It subsidized it, built it for free, creating an interstate trucking business from scratch with a huge subsidy. The railroads could have owned it. They chose not to because they were railroads. Then the US government subsidized the building of international airports all over the United States, subsidizing, therefore, creating air freight. Remember, the railroads built all their own tracks, right? So these guys had a massive cost advantage. And they didn't do it because they were focused. They were railroad companies. When you misdefine your market, it doesn't matter how well you execute. In my world, for the last 5 years, we've been misdefining the market, right? What's my world? It's the World Wide Web on top of the internet, right? Wrong. It hasn't been like that since 2007. This is the real world. Half the units attached online are smartphones. More than half the total dollars being spent are being spent on this platform. As a consequence, if you view the world as the World Wide Web and the internet, you're missing half the market and more than half the profits. This is a real problem for companies like Google, Microsoft, and Facebook. So let's start with Microsoft. Before 1980, if you wanted to buy a computer, you had to buy a computer designed for missile targeting, a mainframe. From 1980 to 2000, if you wanted to buy a computer, you had to buy one designed for spreadsheets. Today, the devices are all made for us. And it's a really interesting thing, because devices made for consumers actually are fundamentally better than ones made for the government or business. Because the government and business buy tools, and then they like to add value to them. Consumers just want an experience that works. Since 2000, all the technology has been aimed at the needs of consumers. And the entire, if you will, value proposition of tech has changed to the detriment of Windows. And this is a huge deal, because in California now we have a new concept called BYOD. Anybody here looking at a job where they talk BYOD? Bring your own device. It's not far away that no company is going to give you a computer. Why? Because it would be an insult. Right? You've already got the thing you want. In most job classifications, an iPad or an iPhone will be more than enough. If you're an accountant or investment banker, you still got to do spreadsheets. Fine. If you're a creative artist, you need to design things in Photoshop, you're going to use a Mac. Fine. But if you're in sales, forget it. You're never going to see a PC again starting in a couple of years for the rest of your life, and you're going to feel really good about it. And your boss is going to feel way good about it because they eliminate $1,000 of support every time they get rid of a PC. That's per year. You can't spend $1,000 on an iPad. Well, you can with tax, but before tax you can't. So let's think about this, right? So here's Microsoft's problem. 5 years ago, 96% of all connected devices ran Windows. Today, the number is about 42. 5 years. They lost more than half their addressable market. Now, let me ask you, you're faced with this strategic problem. Like you were asleep for 5 years, you woke up, and you lost more than half your addressable market. What do you do now? I'll recommend one thing. Since you can't buy Facebook, you got to buy Skype. Why? Second largest number of active, engaged users on the internet. The largest telecom company in the world. What Microsoft did there was strategically, I think, the best M&A transaction in the history of tech. And remarkably, there is not one person I can find at Microsoft that even understands what they bought. They are going to embed it with Windows, and they're going to kill it. And trust me, I'm trying so hard not to make that not happen. They're friends of mine. They're big supporters of Tuck. I don't want them to fail on this. They are one good night's sleep away from getting that exactly right. And if they do, they will dominate these devices in the developing world, which will support them for the next 50 years. They will be the next Apple. But it won't be on Windows. Windows, they got to cash out of. And it'll be great business for a while, right? But here's the problem. Google is screwed too. Why is Google screwed? Because the use cases in mobile are fundamentally different, and people don't search the same way. See, index search is a really horrible experience, unless you're a journalist. If somebody says, you need to find a restaurant for lunch, where do you go? Yelp, right? Right? You want an opinion on a camera. Do you go and look on Google, or do you look on Facebook and ask a friend, right? The world has changed, and Google wasn't paying attention, and it missed the really key changes. And every time it tried to compete, it tried to turn the new thing into index search. And they've failed in 20 different categories. And there's a successful, now nearly public company in every one of them. So here's the problem, right? If you're not a journalist, if you're a normal human being, for every 100 searches you do on your desktop, you'll do about 10 on your iPad and 1 on your iPhone. And the reason is because the iPad has Wi-Fi most of the time, so the web experience is not so horrible. So you're going to be more willing to go to Google there. But if you're on 3G, Google is such a dreadful experience. You're on average 5 to 6 web touches away from whatever it is you're really looking for. Right? It takes forever. Who has that kind of time? Nobody. So Google's screwed. And you can see it in the numbers. I didn't make these up. This is what actually happens. And so Microsoft and Google, 0 profits in mobile. 0. I mean, it is a complete loss of half the market. And has anybody ever said that to you before? Has anybody pointed that out? Does anyone disagree that that's what happened? Right? The most important thing investing is you have to understand what's happening now. It's really hard to know what's going to happen in the future if your starting point is wrong. And the people I compete with all are starting from the wrong starting point. I don't know why. I've been doing this for free for 16 months. You can download it off my website. I think I have bad breath. So here's the problem, okay? It's not just Google and Microsoft who haven't profited from this. A lot of great companies are O for mobile, right? This is a huge issue. I mean, Facebook. I'm a huge investor in Facebook. Been involved for ages. Been trying for 5 years to convince them that mobile is different, right? Well, Roger, what do you want on mobile that you can't get on our current thing? Well, I'd like to be here. I'd like to put this thing up and have all of you be my friends. That's not so much to ask, right? I first asked 5 years ago. I'm patient, though. I'll get it someday. These guys over here are all immensely profitable. I don't even have Intel on that list, right? They've just gotten their asses kicked. And look who the guys are on the right, right? Would you go into a dark alley with Verizon or AT&T? I don't think so. You think the publishers are out there to help Apple? I don't think so. And Amazon and Barnes & Noble aren't even on Apple's platform. They're on Android. So Apple's there basically fighting all by itself and doing a mighty fine job, right? They've built this huge thing. I consider this a very unstable situation.
However, Apple has created, in my mind, the largest strategic advantage that I've seen certainly since Windows 95, and I think arguably since the IBM mainframe monopoly. And here's how it works. When Google came along, right, the internet was full of really high production value things. We were coming off the era of Photoshop and the era of Macromedia Director and Flash, and people were spending a lot of money, and Google says, look, nobody can find anything. I'm going to organize everything for you. What they didn't tell everybody was how they were going to organize everything. They were going to organize it by stripping out the differences, so that the only difference that mattered was the links in. Right? So the tool sets supporting HTML4 have been frozen for more than a decade. What's the last platform you remember that had that problem? Windows. What happened? It died. Just now we got a line, right? 2 data points. So here's how Google organized it. They said, we're going to organize it. We're going to make a lot of money. Come on in, guys. Come on in. We're going to make a lot of money, but we're going to follow the open source mantra exactly. We're going to focus on the long tail. It's all going to be free. We're going to commoditize all the content to make sure it's free. And we'll be the technological state of the art. Total Wild West, right? You're going to get the newest things on the first day. Apple says, okay, I'll bet that's wrong. So I'm going to do one minus that. Exactly the opposite. I'm not going to be open source. I'm going to have a proprietary operating system. I'm not going to be long tail. I'm going to focus on brands. I'm going to let them charge. I'm going to let them differentiate their products. And I'm going to give them an environment that's really secure for transactions so they can get paid. And then here's the kicker. I'm going to charge the customer $400 for this and $800 to $1,000 for an iPad. Get exactly the same content they get for free over here, but in a very different user experience. So what happened? Whoop! The 2 fastest growing products in the history of products are the iPhone and the iPad. And what did they do? Proprietary operating system. Obviously, you can't build a tech business on a proprietary operating system. They focused on old brands. Well, I can't build a tech business on that. They made people pay. Can't do that. Turns out all those things were wrong. People don't want technology. They want content. They want a happy ending. The key point here is the $400 to $800. They have successfully triaged 100% of the people who will pay for content. They've left poor Android with 2 kinds of people. People who get it for free, or for $100, which is 80% of the Android market, and then people who are technology heat seekers who want to be at the edge, none of whom are willing to pay for content. That's a really serious issue which I want you to remember for later on in the presentation. So, I have a hypothesis about what's happening here, which is that we've lived in an era of commoditization, and it's not our first one. When Keith and Jay and Claudia and my dear friend, we were all in business school in 1982. We get out of business school, personal computers have just shipped, right? What was the experience? You had 2 choices. Green text, ASCII text on a black screen, or if you bought from Wise Technology, you could have yellow text on a black screen. There were no production values at all. 1984, Adobe ships PostScript. They bundle it with the Mac. That creates desktop publishing, which leads to PowerPoint, Photoshop, Macromedia Director, Flash, and all the other things. For 14 years, production values rise really intensely. Google shows up, and for 10 years, everything's commoditized. It's a pendulum. When it gets to one extreme, there's nowhere more to go, and you have to reverse. What has happened is Google took it as far as it could go, and Apple brought it back. Here's what I want you to think about. In the Google world, the metric that mattered was traffic. Over here, that's not what matters. What matters over here is engagement. How much time do they spend? The reason that's different
is because of who wins. Traffic gets won by middlemen. Engagement gets won by the people who create the content and the consumers who buy it. It means the skills that made you successful in HTML4 and the skills that will make you successful in HTML5 are literally polar opposites. There is no reason to believe Google can ever be successful here. Now, I don't know how far it's going to go. So this is my personal Moore's Law. You know, Moore's Law is not a law, right? Everybody know what Moore's Law is? Please, raise your hands if you know what Moore's Law is. Okay, you don't. So for those who don't know, every 18 months, it predicts that the price performance of any technology product will double. And they call it a law because it's been true for 50 years. It's not actually a law. It's a challenge to engineers. It basically says, unless you're a lot stupider than your older sister, you're going to be able to double this every 18 months. Okay? Well, this is my little challenge. Unless we're a lot stupider than the guys working at Google, we should be able to move this thing all the way over here, which means any startup that helps do that is going to become fabulously wealthy. Because we're replacing all the dollars that currently go to Microsoft, Google, and many others. It happens, I think, Facebook can participate here, but not at the user experience level. So let's think about what's going to happen. Anybody here developed HTML before? Whoa. Okay. It's going to be tricky. So basically, if you were to strip a typical web page down to its components, you would see that all the video boxes for the ads and other things are in Adobe Flash. And the text is in HTML4. It's basically ASCII text with a bunch of markers so that it lays it out nicely. The problem is that Flash not only isn't HTML, right? It's an application controlled by somebody else that's been around for 15 years. So it's extremely long in the tooth, which means it's fragile. Each one of those Flash boxes boots independently, which is why when you're waiting for your page to boot, it boots one ad, then another ad, then another ad, then another ad, and then finally the text, right? That's separate apps each time. It is a huge source of delay, which makes your iPhone experience intolerable. That's why they don't support Flash. And it is a source of fragility on the page. And most important, you cannot search from HTML into Flash, which means you cannot coordinate the ads to the content. This is a huge issue. In HTML5, all the functionality of Flash is now incorporated in the programming language itself. The effect of this, in artistic terms, is to give you a clean sheet of paper. So creatively, it's a blank page. But from an engineering perspective, it's much more interesting than that. Because every pixel on an HTML5 page can be an application. Every one of them can be intelligent, they can be self-aware, which means you can do things you could never do before. Not because you couldn't do them technically, but because it would have cost too much, it wouldn't have been worth it. So let's start by looking at this. My hypothesis is that value to publishers and consumers is a function of engagement. More engagement is good for both sides. From the consumer's point of view, it means you found something you're interested in. From the other guy's perspective, there's enough time involved for value to be created. So imagine here, every pixel can be an app. So anybody here read the New York Times? David Pogue has a column each week where he recommends 3 or 4 or 5 products. Imagine this is the New York Times on Pogue's day, Pogue's page. Because everything can be its own app, there's no reason why an ad for, say, Walmart or Amazon could not sit there and look at the page and go, are any of these things products? And if they are products, do I sell them? And if I do, may I offer them on the page? Now let's think about that for a minute. Right? You're creating demand and satisfying it on the same page. Does anybody know another ad form that does that? It's called the infomercial, the single most profitable form of advertising on television. The problem with infomercials is they only work for cleaning products and beauty products and weight loss products, basically. Things that cost 30 cents that you can sell for 30 bucks. Ginsu knives. This is going to do it for all product classifications. What does that mean? It means you're going to compress the distribution chain. But now let's do a little science fiction. Let us imagine that Facebook, instead of worrying about user experience, decides to enhance Connect, the way that publishers and retailers confirm your identity today, with a little lockbox where you could hold personal information that you want to use in transactions, but you only want to use it with approved vendors. Remember how Connect works. If the New York Times wants to use Connect for me, I have to approve it. If Walmart wants to use Connect with me, I have to approve it. So it's a perfect situation. So imagine a situation where the new identity product from Facebook might have my one-click settings for Walmart or Amazon in it. Now you're creating demand, satisfying it on the same page with one click, which means the person never leaves the page. What business are you in now? Is this a CPM business? You know, a cost per thousand? No. This is lead gen. You're going to be paid dollars per customer versus pennies per thousand. It is a fundamental different model. It compresses the distribution chain at a point in time when the economy is very weak and very open to that idea. The only problem is that HTML5 is still in diapers. We cannot do this today, and I'm not sure how long it's going to take for all the pieces to be there. My point is, I don't really care because I'm only going to focus on it today in mobile because of this. So I want you to think about this notion. I talk about HTML5 in the form of apps, okay? In this context, I can think of at least 3 forms of this that are going to matter. Number one, it actually functions like a native app. So imagine that Jay, who works at Fidelity, has purchased that space on the Wall Street Journal or in the New York Times business section. And I have put my 10 stocks into my Facebook identity lockbox so that the ad looks at my lockbox and says, can I use your 10 stocks? I've given permission to stock apps to do it, so it loads my stocks automatically. Except it's better than that. It's actually, I can tear it off. This is an app delivery vehicle. Right now, people get paid like $1 to deliver a toolbar. What would Fidelity pay to have the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal delivering a trading app to customers? We're talking about a world in which publishers are going to get well in a huge hurry. And not a little well, I mean a lot well. The second one up here. This is like, anybody here use Instapaper or any of the read it later things? Right? This is just, you know, I want to ebook the thing and look at it later. It's not a permanent app, not like the other one. And then the third one, which is what I think is the really cool idea, which is for a portion of a story. I want something like a bookmark, but I want the actual content downloaded. I see this great infographic. I want to keep it. A great quote. I want to keep that. I just want to clip it. I think that's a huge app. No small measure because it can all be monetized. Think about it this way. The New York Times says, no more paywall, but if you want to retain stuff, you pay $10 a month. That gets to the right problem, right? Maybe you pay $50 a month. I don't know. I don't know what the price is. All I know is that these are all monetizable things. And we know they're that way because we've already been through it with the apps on the iPhone. So this is what I think the opportunity is. I think the World Wide Web is still growing, HTML4, but very slowly. Apple's model is still growing like a bat out of hell. I don't know where the law of large numbers kicks in. I really don't. Because the iPad's just, it's a totally different curve, right? I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's not impossible to imagine $100 billion worth of iPad revenues quickly and hundreds of billions way before this thing peaks. Because there isn't a competitor on the field. But the important thing about HTML5 is nobody controls the user experience. Google controls the web and Apple controls the app model from a value point of view. But in HTML5, you don't have to go through the App Store. You don't have to pay 30 points of your revenue to Apple. You get the benefit of an industry standard software development language which 10 times as many people know how to use as Flash. And by the way, you get all the benefits of open source. So I think you're going to see a lot of development here, not necessarily by app guys, but at least initially by content guys. Why? It's really simple. You know, you guys are too young to have children of age 8, but if you ask a kid age 8 what a computer is, this is what they tell you. Has everybody seen the broken iPad thing on YouTube? The kid with the magazine? Right? This is not bullshit. I mean, even if you think Microsoft's got another 2-3 years, God bless. But when these guys get to high school, the number of Windows computers bought by that population group in high school will be 0. Not sort of zero. I mean absolutely zero. It is over. I mean, yeah, maybe they get 5 years of tail, but who cares? It's a wasting asset. Has to be managed as such, and that's not the way they're doing it. Android. I have the hardest time getting people to understand math on this, right? This is like, here, it's really, really simple. If you were around in the 80s, you went through the experience of Unix competing against Windows. And the problem that Unix had was it was open source and everybody made it their own. There was a big fight over a standards thing called Big Endian versus Little Endian. Sun was on one side, DEC was on the other. It was a cluster. I mean, it was a complete disaster. Now, that was a business measured in tens and hundreds of thousands of units. Google literally reproduced those mistakes in a business measured in hundreds of millions of units, which means they destroyed the economic viability of this thing with the second vendor they brought in. This thing has been dead for 4 years, since the year it was introduced. And here's why. These numbers for the iPhone 4. Apple had a $400 retail price and a $350 subsidy. $750 gross revenue with a $300 cost, $450 of gross margin. During the period in question, I do not believe any Android phone sold for more than $400 gross revenue. So Apple's gross margin was $50 higher. And I don't believe that any individual Android had more than 20% of the iPhone's unit volume, which means that Apple had a huge cost advantage. That was a good outcome. And you can't fix it with Android's model because no one can make any money. Why? Because their customers are either getting it free or technology's heat seekers who don't pay for anything. There's no way to build a viable ecosystem on it that isn't HTML4 web. I have developed these HTML5 apps. None of them work on Android. Why? Because there's a different version of HTML5 on every Android product. Why? Because people are adding value. So here's the problem. Android was best the first day, just like Google+, right? Just like Twitter, like every Microsoft product, right? Each feature and function they add makes it more complex and less usable. And that's what happened with Android. The very first one was pretty cool. The original Droid was, kind of right on. Not the very first one, but the first one that somebody else made. But each one of these guys is going their own way, pulling it further and further apart. And the unit volume leaders in the high value portion, which is the tablet market, are Amazon and Barnes & Noble, who are incompatible with each other and incompatible with everything else. And they don't care, right? They don't care. They just want it cheap. I mean, Intel's going to make a phone probably up here too. They don't care if they compatible with anybody else. It's just not their problem. That's not how they think about it. There's no economics in making it compatible. If you made it compatible, the other guy's likely to get more of the benefit than you because he was there first. Right? Nobody wants to concede that space. That's the problem with open source. So to a first approximation, right, if there's $100 worth of profit in the market, 100 of it will go to the guy who's not open source and 0 of it will go to the guy who is. Now, if you measure things by units, it's likely to be the other way around. Right? Because the Android products will sell shitloads of units because they sell for basically their marginal cost. Right? Not their fully loaded cost, their marginal cost. And, this is the point I made earlier. No need to spend any more time on it. It's just Apple has everything over these guys. Really important point for those of you who want to be entrepreneurs. Social and mobile are now a cost. They are the ante to get in the game. You have to nail social, you have to nail mobile just to play. Then you have to find what your business is. Okay? So just remember that. There are not going to be any more social platforms. Anymore, there are going to be more index search engines, right? I mean, there may be a new generation of index search done a different way for HTML5, but that will be a different market, the same way that, if somebody builds a next generation social thing, I imagine that might happen, but it's way too early for that. Way, way, way too early. I mean, Facebook's still rising. Have you ever thought about what happens after 4G? I'm sure you haven't, but 4G is really important because it has a 10-to-1 price performance advantage over 3G for data. But they both blow. I mean, data wants to be on packet switch networks, and cellular networks are circuit switch. It's just an inherently stupid thing to put data over them. Very inefficient use of them. The United States has just taken television from analog to digital. And it turns out that in analog, you have a sine wave for the signal, which means the tails are really big. And so, you guys are too young to remember when we had antennas, but when you had antennas, channel 2 always was fuzzy because it had interference from below from the COP frequencies. There were appropriate white spaces for all the other channels, but not channel 2. In digital, the decay is instantaneous. You need this much white space, not that much. The extra space is low frequency, which means long distance and great in-building penetration. It is perfect for data. Absolutely perfect. As a consequence, you can be certain that our government will blow this. The right way to do it would be to sit there and say, look, the telcos are going to build out 4G. It's going to be a very profitable business. We're going to let them continue their monopolies, but they can't touch this. This should be treated like the internet, as a new wireless internet, and it should be done by totally separate people. The reason is because the capital cost will be much lower. It does not need to be built out nationally. It can be done in urban areas, and you can start with the ones that pay best, but it has one huge advantage in rural, right? Channel 2 and Channel 3 go a really long way in rural areas. So you can actually reach them with high bandwidth wireless. This is a huge deal. If we get this wrong, though, we're toast. Anybody here a baseball fan? This is the year. This is the beginning of the end of cable television. MLB Extra Innings. For $25 a month, you can now buy your way past cable blackouts. It is the first time an actual cable product has pulled this off. Wow. What do you think the over and under is, time-wise, on the NFL getting to this? And what is the half-life of ESPN after that happens? Right? You got me, right? It'll play out like Windows, a little bit more time. These are smart people. They have legal monopolies, okay? But they're screwed. And over the top is going to be a gigantic business opportunity for the people who can figure out how to do it. So I'm going to wrap here with a little bit of a description of what's going on. So I'm describing what I think is the single most exciting thing to come along in my world in at least 15 years and probably 30. Unfortunately, we have two issues, well, maybe three. Europe, not settled, not stable. We have Iran. I'll say that in the least politically contentious way. We have Iran to worry about. And we have a presidential election cycle where, for reasons I cannot describe, we don't actually have conversations. It's more Hatfield McCoys, right? Well, any one of those things is enough to really mess up the investment environment. However, I'm talking about things you can base your career on. These are things that are going to last 10 or 20 years. I recommend you start now. Why? Because you've got at least 2 years before HTML5 is fleshed out enough to be fully deployed, which means you have enough time to do a startup to do one of the core enabling technologies. This is the first time in my life I've ever told Tuck students I thought it was a good idea to be an entrepreneur coming out of business school. This is the first and probably the only moment it will ever happen, okay? And I probably won't say it to next year's class. Because this window is really brief, right? If you wanted to compete with Facebook, you had to start the same year, right? The same way if you wanted to compete with Google, you had to start the same year, right? You've read The Outliers, right? If you wanted to be just a rock and roll guitar player, you had to be born in 43 or 44. Right? If you wanted to start a personal computer company, you had to be born in 55 or 56. Okay? These things happen in cohorts. You guys are as lucky relative to the tech people coming out of here as Scott and Jay and well, you didn't go right away into Wall Street, and I were in going straight to Wall Street in 1982. Right? It made a huge difference. So, timing is everything. And you guys are in the right place at the right time.